Thanks everyone for joining. We are just about 1 minute away, but I think we'll start with some introductions and I'm sure we'll have a few more people joining in, but thank you so much for joining us for this exclusive X Spaces event, where we are very lucky to be joined by some of New Internationalist's amazing global contributors joining us from different parts of the world about how to tackle the global far right and fund journalism that sparks change. This event is being recorded and will be made available to all of you via our YouTube channel later this week. And we'll also make snippets available on our podcast, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Maxine. I'm the digital editor at New Internationalist. Joining me as well are some of my colleagues, co-editors, Paula and Amy. We are living in a critical moment for democracy, justice, and truth. From fascists in the streets to heads of state, the far right is gaining power and getting organized across borders. Politics of hate and division are putting human rights and climate action under threat, and this time it's global. So that's why our top priority this year is exposing the global far right and making the case for an internationalist alternative that can win popular support. This event is being held as part of our crowdfunder, Rewire the World, and I've just received word we're about 87% towards our goal of raising £50,000, which is absolutely incredible, and we're really hoping to encourage those of you that follow us to really kind of help us get over the line before our deadline on Friday. So it's not lost on us that we're doing this event on X. We all know that X is a super toxic platform at the moment. But we're hoping to be able to mobilize our shared audiences for good. There are still tens of thousands of people who believe in real change on this app. And rest assured, we have long-term plans to move off the app. But today, we really want to mobilize those audiences for good, and that includes you. So thanks again for tuning in. We'll update you as the funds start coming in through this event. So please keep those donations coming, and please keep an eye on the thread and on the chat for more updates. So to introduce our panelists, I'm really thrilled today to be joined by 4 fantastic NI contributors. First up in London, we have Nick Dearden, who is also the director of Global Justice Now and a longtime contributor and supporter of New Internationalist. Nick has written recent pieces on what Trump means for the world and how the aid industry is sanitizing the Gaza genocide. We'll post some links to those articles in the chat for you to read as well. Also joining us is Tarushi Aswani, a freelance journalist based in New Delhi, India. She covers stories on human rights, governance, religion, and politics in India. She recently wrote a piece for our website about what another Modi term means for Muslims in India, and she has covered the far-right government in India extensively for NI as well as for other outlets. Paul is also going to share a couple of links to her work as well. Next up, we have Taiwo Hassan, a socialist, author, and journalist from Lagos, Nigeria, who writes under the pseudonym Obiora Ikoku. Taiwo covers topics including emerging social movements, resistance, and political turmoil. Most recently, he has written for New Internationalist about Sudan's civilian resistance and big oil's exodus from the Niger Delta. But he is pumping out a lot of stories for a lot of outlets as well, so definitely one to keep an eye on. And lastly, we have Kay Biswas, another London-based freelance journalist writing about the history of the rise of the global far right, and who also contributed to our last issue on this topic, which was all the way back in 2011, in which he charted the rise of far-right populism in Europe. We'll be posting a link in the chat for that issue. Those of you that are attending the event will have access to read that from our digital archive, and definitely one to check out, especially as we reflect on where we were then and where we are today. So thanks again to everyone for joining. Really excited to dive into this discussion. We're going to move through fairly quickly. We only have an hour with everyone today. But if you're inspired by what you hear and you want to fund more of our reporting on this topic from these contributors as well as others, please do make a donation to our campaign via the links. We'll be posting links and sharing that throughout the space. So I'm going to get started right away. I'm going to come to you first, Nick. Can you sort of paint us a picture? Why are we seeing a resurgence of far-right ideologies and politics across the globe? What's led to this moment? Oh, sorry, Nick, I've just invited you to speak. You were just in as a listener. Okay, just while Nick, I think you are sorting out your speaking abilities, I'm just going to move to you next, actually, Biz, to talk about your contribution back in 2011 to the rise of the global far right. And in your piece, you wrote that much of the far right's success in recent years is down to hard work. Their vote is won through vigorous campaigning on the doorstep and by independent activism rather than by relying on exposure in the mainstream media. Can you talk about how 14 years later, the mainstream media has actually fueled the rise of the global far right?
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be able to speak about this after 14 years. I mean, just to provide some context, that New Internationalist special was in 2011, which was kind of in the aftermath of the crash. And I think the analysis holds up pretty well 14 years later. I think it was the first kind of big overview of the new democratic European politics, announcing a third pillar in Europe's post-war history. So in addition to social democracy on the centre left and Christian democracy on the centre right, we introduced nativist populism on the far right. And it was a terminology that I very much with the New Internationalist editors wrestled with. But I think it's accepted as a term now. For example, the Financial Times uses nativist populism and the far right interchangeably. So I think we successfully predicted the blurring of these lines between traditional right and a far right at a time of left liberal fragmentation. So what we've seen in the last decade and a half is the far right has continued its ascendancy. We've got Meloni in Italy, Kickel in Austria, Wilders in the Netherlands, winning elections since 2011. While both National Rally in France and Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, and to a certain extent Reform in the UK, are treated as these viable election winning vehicles. So their respectability, these once outside political parties, their respectability is garnered through the mainstream. Print and broadcast media for sure, but also their fellow politicians. We've seen conservative politicians in France wanting to work with Le Pen. You've seen a number of British conservative politicians extending their hand out to reform. So what we've seen, the key thing in the last decade and a half has been that cordon sanitaire has all but disappeared. And we've got the mainstreaming of anti-immigrant discourse through media, as trust in the traditional ruling parties has declined. So those things that I outlined in 2011, a kind of anti-elite sentiment and an anti-immigrant sentiment, and also to a point in Europe, an anti-EU sentiment has really bolstered this movement over the last 14, 15 years. And that's coincided with European populaces finding themselves materially worse off. Um, so I feel that it's a mixture of the mainstream media has adopted these far right talking points around the threats of migration and I suppose migrant communities criminal tendencies is what they would see it. And Christian democracy, that centre right, has been sort of swiftly radicalized. You know, I remember when I was younger, to be a conservative in Europe was to want a smaller state, lower taxes. Those same figures, having been radicalized, now believe that like immigrants are sort of actively trying to take over their countries and Muslims are a threat to the Western way of life, and also the sorts of scare stories around migrant crime. So the parties of the far right have become viable options in the mainstream kind of mindset. And in almost every Western European country since the crash, there is like a far right vehicle that's either part of government or the most vocal opposition.
Thanks so much for that, Biz. And I actually want to bring that back now to you, Nick. Thanks. I think you've got your speaker capabilities switched back on now. Can you sort of touch on that more from a global perspective, talking about what some of the economic factors are and why we're seeing this resurgence of far-right ideologies and politics across the globe right now?
Yeah, definitely. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Great, thanks for inviting me. So, I mean, look, we've had 40 years or so of being told that the market has the solution to everything, to every problem. That the market should be allowed to make decisions about our society and our lives, and it should be allowed to mediate all of our relationships, and the individuals don't require any protection from that whatsoever. And by the market, obviously, I don't mean the place that people buy their fruit and veg. I mean essentially the rule of money, the rule of big business. These are the forces that are making all the key decisions in the world, and we have a whole international architecture set up to guarantee that this is the case. And those forces aren't making decisions based on the public interest or environmental interest, and foremost in their. And that's the primary interest of those taking decisions. So, yeah, I think in that context, it's not at all surprising that people have lost their faith in democracy because they know that's not where real decisions are made. There was an opinion poll just out in the UK a few weeks ago that was just asking young people, so late teenagers, people in their early 20s, an incredible lack of faith in democracy. I mean, some people saying, you know, it'd be better if we had an authoritarian government. Others saying we need a complete revolution, change everything in the way decisions are made. So there's a phenomenal lack of faith in democracy that I think is not surprising. And indeed, it's not the first time we've been here. There's a great Hungarian economist and philosopher who was writing in the 1940s, looking at the period in the lead up to the Second World War, who was saying, look, if you throw all of society's decisions over to the market, then people will eventually reach out for any force that's able to protect them. You know, that may be from the left or it may be from the right. You know, people won't in a way be too fussy about that, but they will know that they want protection because the rule of the market will turn everything that they care about in the world into just so many commodities otherwise, and that's not how people want to live. So I think that's the real background to what we're seeing now. It is all the things that, you know, we've been fighting against, and New Internationalist has been writing against for the past 30-40 years now, really coming home to roost. And I think we need to recognize that, because there is a danger otherwise that we kind of say, well, let's just get back to this period where things were stable, you know, where the people in the center were in charge and they looked like reasonable people and they could kind of manage things in a competent way. That's actually been the cause of everything that we're seeing in the world now. So, you know, one of the things we're saying is this is not just about Trump, it's about the causes of Trump and how we fight the causes of Trump. And the causes of Trump are exactly this kind of market logic that we've been fighting for a long time. And so the solution, the answer to that, has to be a far more radically more democratic society than the ones we're living in. There is no room for the kind of monopoly capitalists, the Musks and the Zuckerbergs and whatever in this world. And I think we've got to get back to those kind of radical politics if we want to offer people the hope, the protection that they so desperately need from the economic forces that are ravaging their lives and their societies.
Thanks so much for that, Nick. And I think, yeah, like you say, it's not just about Trump. It's about the politics that caused Trump and the economics that has led to Trump, but it's also about figures like Modi, for example. And so I want to bring it over to Tarushi now to talk about kind of the perspective from India. I think Modi was kind of one of these sort of mainstream politicians that really sort of signaled a shift into the rise in power and influence of the far right. And he's been in power in India for about 10 years now. Tarushi, can you sort of explain what his far-right government has done to attack independent media in the country and what the media landscape sort of looks like in India that has helped Modi to maintain his grip on power?
Thank you for having me. To answer your question about Modi's far-right government, after 10 years, India has elected him again for the third term now. Recently in 2024, we saw that he got his third term, which means that his model of far-right extremism is being validated, is being given a mandate by the majority in India. However, what I also could pick up from what Biswas said was that there are themes that we see that far-right governments take up to, sort of further their claim of, establishing Muslim threat. Now, in India, what we have, using media to explain to you how Modi has maintained his extremism as a prime minister who has had a very tainted record in the past of being the head of the state in 2002 when India saw the largest mass murder of Muslims possible in India after 1947. So, what Mr. Modi has very cleverly done that in the 10 years that he has been the Prime Minister of India, he has never ever had to speak to media on our terms. We have never seen him host a press conference where people of the media get to question him about his management of the coronavirus, of why people are dying despite him alleging that there is no hunger, there is no poverty. We don't get to speak to him. We only get to speak to him when he wants to speak to us on his terms and on the issues he wants to speak to us about. Even for that matter, you see that there are instances where YouTube channels which question his government, his style of governance, his leadership, his party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, those YouTube channels are banned off of YouTube, and he even jails journalists so that there are certain things which don't come in public eye. There are journalists who were jailed for simply trying to report a rape that happened in the BJP ruled state of Uttar Pradesh in northern India. These journalists are going to jail. Journalists are being killed in India for the simple fact of trying to report corruption, financial irregularities, and environment irregularities, if we see it for that matter. In his speeches and the way he wants to engage with Indians as a whole, he has very many times very openly attacked Muslims. He has very many times attacked refugees and also attacked people who do not sort of ally with Hinduism. So, in India, after 10 years of the kind of media control he has had on TV platforms, on YouTube channels, on what you can publish on the internet as a free, independent organization, 70% of Indian media is now under direct control of the government, or at least of the friends of government, people who sort of are friend Mr. Modi and his style of governance, people who are able to fund Mr. Modi's party, and in exchange they are allowed to purchase news platforms and then run news whatever suits the ruling government. We also saw in the last few years the takeover of a very well-known Indian platform TV channel. It's called NDTV. NDTV was purchased by a particular group it's a conglomerate, and the owner of the conglomerate is extremely good friends with Mr. Modi. So, as the Prime Minister, I will not speak to my people. I will not speak to independent media channels that want to ask me questions about the lackings in my government. And the rest of the media channels, I will help my friends to purchase. So, that is how, in the last 10 years, we've seen that the media is being either jailed or there is internet shutdown. If we talk about Indian ruled Kashmir, we see a lot of internet shutdowns there. And even if you do not have internet shutdowns, journalists are served with terrorist acts and put into prisons for as high as 2 years to as high as 5 years. We are seeing that Kashmir has no independent journalism whatsoever. Journalists in Indian ruled Kashmir do not wish to report on Kashmir anymore because their families are harassed, they are put behind bars, and they are harassed to the extent of them never being able to pick up any other job across India. So I think this is how we can sum up the kind of journalism or jail journalism we are seeing in India today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarushi. It's pretty terrifying echoes when we see kind of what the Trump administration is also doing in terms of shutting down who gets to ask questions, who gets to attend press conferences and what gets to be reported. And I think just really speaks to the importance, but also the danger of this kind of work of being an independent journalist and trying to basically cover what the government doesn't want people to know. And I think, as we've been saying, as a small independent magazine, funding this type of journalism costs money, and we don't have billionaires to be able to, pay some reporters to go and sit in on a press conference and write up a nice fluffy little piece for us. So, the work that you're doing is so important, and we're really, really grateful to have you doing that despite all the odds being stacked against you and your colleagues. I want to sort of bring now the perspective to Taiwo from Africa, from Nigeria. I think a lot of people in a lot of different countries will be sort of familiar with, a lack of a free press, perhaps, and not being able to, challenge authority in certain contexts. But can you paint us a bit of a picture about how the far right and or some conservative influences are working with corporate interests in Nigeria?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. And I must say that when we are talking about far right in Nigeria or in Africa, basically you are talking about conservative ideas and ideologies that are often wielded by the capitalist ruling elite to promote ethnicism, to promote artificial division among the people, and to sort of try to reinforce all of the primeval conditions of life and culture that used to exist back in Africa, and for which do not have a place anymore in the 21st century. So that you have, for instance, campaigns against the abortion right. You have campaigns to continue to subjugate women. You have campaigns to against sexual minorities. These are fundamentalist ideas that exist in Nigerian society that are often promoted, leads to sort of try and control society. And they are able to do this by utilizing a whole lot of measures, including the traditional media, which is under the control of a capitalist influence, but also conservative people in society. The few traditional media that are independent and that are progressive are usually subjected to all kinds of restrictions, including direct attack and suppression. And that is why Nigeria today is like one of the worst places for journalists to exist. To be a journalist in Nigeria is more or less to become like a walking target for attacks, for assassinations, and all of that. And that has affected the ability of the media in Nigeria to be able to hold the government to account. And that is why the emergence of Trump in the US and how it has emboldened the far right across the world is a really big danger for us in Nigeria. It's a danger for vulnerable groups. It's a danger for journalists. It's a danger for the democratic right. Because what it means is that the conservative element in Nigerian society will look towards the US and they will find justification for their very anti-democratic and conservative ideas. So, for instance, now, gays and lesbians have been under serious legal and illegal repression in Nigeria and many African countries, including Uganda and Cameroon, over the past period. The attack on diversity in the US by Trump, is having to embolden African government, who then says that if in the US, this is happening, if LGBTQ people do not have a place in the US, then it means that, they cannot have a place in Africa. And this really means a whole lot because it means that for African LGBTQ people, they are not going to be able to exist anymore within the continent without being subject to attack, without being. What is even much more tragic is how Trump's policy on the immigration would then serve to ensure that those who have to escape this heightened attack on democratic rights in a place like Nigeria, attack on sexual minorities in a place like Nigeria, they will have no place to go. I mean, prior to now, many political activists, journalists who are persecuted, sexual minorities and vulnerable groups, can, seek asylum in other countries, US, in order to escape persecution here in Nigeria. The closure of the border, the visa restrictions, and all of that is happening, the whole campaign against immigrants that the far right in the US is leading would have a certain implication, which means that to keep, vulnerable groups, activists, journalists who need to escape persecution, to keep them trapped, which means that they'll become mincemeat for the despotic government that are after them. But where another area where we are likely going to have even more crisis in Nigeria going forward, but not just Nigeria, many parts of Africa as well.
Thanks so much for that. I think, being able to hear from each of our contributors kind of individually in their context, I think just really lays out just the gravity of the situation and the importance of this kind of reporting that is only, getting harder and harder to do. I just wanted to give a quick update. Just since we've started this event, we've seen another £120 in donations coming through via our crowdfunder, which is amazing. And we're just inching so much closer to hitting that £50,000, which will all be used directly to fund our reporting into the rise of the global far right and the social movements working towards real change and working to build an internationalist alternative, something that all of the contributors today are working on and that we want to continue funding them and others to do. Now that we've sort of laid out the challenges, I kind of want to move into a conversation around what opportunities can emerge from this moment. So I want to put it to you first, Nick. You've written and you've discussed today that Trump is not only a symptom of a deeply unfair and unsustainable economy, he is a response to changing geopolitics and an empire in decline. Can you talk about what opportunities you think will emerge from this moment and what people need to do to organize against what's happening? You're just on mute, Nick. Oh, can you hear us, Nick? I think you're still on mute. Oh, now you've switched back to listener. Hang on. Okay, just while we sort that out, Biz, I'm actually going to move back to you. You've written around how far-right populist parties try to pitch themselves as the authentic voice of the people and representatives of this so-called silent majority addressing issues that they claim have long been ignored by politicians. Issues like migration as one example. Can you sort of talk about how mainstream media and centrist politics have enabled this narrative to take hold and where people might be able to actually find their representation and actually be able to find an authentic voice that isn't twisting that that isn't the far right twisting that for their own means?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, after the crash of 2008, Europe's traditional parties, I suppose of the broad centre, centre left, centre right, essentially went, we are not to blame for your economic hardships. They are to blame, for they being migrants. The rise of the far right essentially emerges from a crisis of the centre. So since the crash, Europe's leaders have turned the political narrative away from their own failings, re-evaluating the benefits of historic migration into their countries. So they're forever launching these debates around national identity. They call for punitive border policies. They proclaim multiculturalism dead. This is everyone from, in 2010, Merkel and David Cameron and Silvia Berlusconi and Nicolas Sarkozy. So the centre's reaction to economic hardship has been to adopt these far-right talking points. And in my own country, Great Britain, we've got this historic, some would say, right-wing media ecosystem that's radicalized itself. We have the existence of GB News, run by Sir Paul Marshall, who's also bought the historic conservative Journal of Ideas, The Spectator, there's been a legitimization of the far right. So we saw an unelected man from 2010 to 2024, Nigel Farage, on Question Time, like most weeks, this person advocating kind of anti-immigrant politics was legitimized by the centre. And the conservative press in Britain, which encompasses everything from the Daily Telegraph to the Daily Mail to the tabloid The Sun, embraced Farageism. But it's not even just the conservatives. The progressive side, the progressive media wasted its time on these barely existent political tendencies of the sensible centre. They would analyse red Toryism or blue Labourism. No actual voters in any of the support any of this type of politics. So there is a relationship between the media and the rise of the far right. And I think that's been amplified on social media as traditional media loses eyes and ears to social media. There is this sort of amplification of these talking points around migration. And this has always been the case. I mean, like big media has always platformed far-right voices since the crash. You have Jimmy Åkesson in Sweden writing for Aftonbladet. You've got Geert Wilders, who wrote for the Wall Street Journal. You had Britain's Times sort of advocating a vote for Le Pen as early as over a decade ago. And this reverberates in electoral politics. And there's been a failure from progressives who sort of legitimize these concerns around migration. What we've seen in the last year is Trumpism has reset what is acceptable in politics. So forms of sensible, broad, centrist politics are being blown out the water. You can look at the reaction to climate change. Climate change is apparently no longer an issue for the sensible centre. Now Trump's come in. Immigration is only linked to border security. And I suppose forms of identity politics around Black liberation, women's liberation, gay liberation have been parked to one side. And what Trump has been able to do is globalize these talking points to a point where even countries that lacked a far right previously, or countries with a memory of fascism like Spain or Portugal, they've got viable far right parties now. When they didn't even 15 years ago, that you've got Vox in Spain and Chega in Portugal, as well as what I said earlier. You've got Meloni's party in Italy winning elections, Wilders' party, and Le Pen going from less than 2 million votes 15 years ago to 12 million French people voting for her. So whilst it does seem bleak and the centre's answer to the rise of the far right is left wanting, answers can come from those grassroots activists, migrant-led NGOs, the smattering of like writers and thinkers who can provide context, and not to mention vast swathes of Europe's minority population who know that the answer isn't pandering to the far right around immigration, but creating a sort of cross-national, confident voice to take on this march towards far right politics.
Thanks, Biz. Yeah, I think obviously just such a wealth of knowledge with the history of these movements in different countries around the world, and also what it's going to take from, like you say, grassroots organizing and migrant-led movements to really be able to take these on and help people find true representation and true people-powered movements. Just a quick update. I just seen we're another £80 up in the crowdfunder page. Really, this is so cool to see it come through live. If you're not in a position to donate, by all means, please feel free to share the link. We just have 3 days left in this campaign, so we're really pulling out all the stops and just trying to reach as many people as we can, even if it's someone that you think just might be interested in our journalism and just following us on various accounts and sort of seeing what we do. And if they want to hear more of what we cover. That's the best place to really get to know us. Tarushi, I just want to bring it back to you now. Unfortunately, Nick, I think, is still had some issues with the speaker. But Nick, feel free to share some thoughts as tweets in the chat as well, just in response to the question around kind of what opportunities will emerge from this moment. It'd be great to get your perspective on that, even if it's just written in the tweet thread itself. But to just bring it back to you, Tarushi, can you maybe talk about how your journalism, through some of the reporting that you've done through for New Internationalist, has successfully challenged far-right power in India?
Okay, so my work that I have done with the New Internationalist has been like a few pieces which are trying to decode how, the Indian government is sort of using the language of decolonization to otherize Muslims even more. So, interestingly, right now, as we speak, there is this region in India called Nagpur, and Nagpur has seen violence and policemen getting hurt, civilians getting hurt, and all of this just because this film, which is sort of backed by the Modi government, it's a fictionalized war between a supreme Hindu king and a Muslim leader who has been shown as a very, sort of barbaric leader who loves killing Hindus. So this over fictionalized film has led to riots in India. As we speak, there is curfew in certain regions in India because of this film and the kind of ruckus it created, where you had a lot of Hindu extremists going to Muslim rulers' tombs and sort of trying to attack it and wanting to get away with it. And the other piece I've done also is its way to this, that the Modi government is sort of trying to erase Islamic history and its impact in India. So when we talk about India being part of a subcontinent which was, joined with Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, we have to keep in mind that we have a lot of shared history with, rulers coming to India or undivided India, as I would say. So when we look at the work that I've done for the New Internationalist, we can understand that, I have sort of tried to break this notion where the Modi government is sort of trying to carve a history of its own, trying to prove that, Mughals have always been these barbaric rulers who have tried to ruin everything, ruin temples, and, trying to convert Hinduism and Hindus into Islam. So my work has, curated a lot of events in the last 10 years where we see that leaders of the Modi government, they are trying to shame Muslim freedom fighters who stood for the freedom of India as a secular nation. They are trying to get rid of monuments of Islamic significance. Even, for example, the UNESCO heritage site Taj Mahal was once questioned. A BJP leader literally filed a court case in the Supreme Court of India challenging whether the validity of Taj Mahal is um, in terms of an Islamic monument or whether it is a temple. Such examples are in the work that I have done for your organization, and how, there is this constant tussle between leaders of the government in order which they, try to use Muslims as fodder in their election manifestos, in their failed promises, in the way they have, managed to basically fulfill no promise that they have made over the last few years. So whenever you have some questions being raised at the Modi government, they always come up with this rhetoric, which is also happening today. If there are questions raised about, whether one part of India is not seeing peace, you will always have some other part of India getting a problem in the same time. Like as I started with Nagpur, which is currently experiencing curfews at the moment because of this film that sort of manifests Miss Modi's mindset of Muslims always being the perpetrator, the oppressor, and Hindus always being the victims. So in that sense, also problems with this kind of reporting are that it's very difficult to find platforms that will want to publish truth, and platforms that will want to publish this narrative where I'm challenging the narrative of the government. And how, in India, as I shared in the previous session that I spoke, that you have a lot of media that is directly under the control of Mr. Modi or his friends. So in such times, platforms like New Internationalists really help us to report what is the truth from the ground, be it from Indian ruled Kashmir, be it the reportage I have given from, various parts of India, where you see that Indian media is not raking issues of importance of loss of Islamic history in India at the hands of the Modi government, or maybe, loss of the kind of culture syncretism that we have in India, where, one particular Islamic shrine will mean a lot to, say, Muslims, Hindus, Christians. That kind of reportage, I think, if we have space in India, it is very little for such reportage. And then, of course, we need such platforms that help us to report truth from India, a country which is slipping in ranks every year in terms of media freedom and rising in terms of internet shutdowns.
Thanks so much, Tarushi. Yeah, we've shared a few links to your work via the tweet threads, and some of your writing has also appeared in our print magazine. We publish some things from our print magazine on the website, but for exclusive access to all of this reporting is reserved for subscribers. So Tarushi's done, like you've just laid out, a lot of brilliant reporting. So definitely check that out and keep on top of her reporting and her journalism as well. I wanted to bring the same question over to you, Taiwo. Can you talk about how your journalism and your reporting from Nigeria, but also across West Africa, has successfully challenged authoritarianism? I think you've just muted yourself, Taiwo. Can you hear us okay, Taiwo? If not, feel free to post in the thread itself. Just a reminder to all listeners, we are doing a giveaway of 5 digital subscriptions to New Internationalist for those of you that have attended this event. So, hey, Taiwo,
Can't hear anything anymore.
Can you hear us okay? Oh, might be slight connection issue. But yeah, as I was saying, we will be giving away 5 free digital subscriptions at the end of the spaces. Hi, Taiwo, can you hear us? And are you able to talk about how your journalism has successfully challenged authoritarianism in Nigeria? Okay, we might give you a couple minutes to sort that out. We're actually going to move into a bit of time for an audience Q&A. We've got about 15 minutes to do so, and I know there are quite a few of you that will want to ask questions. One question that I wanted to start with, which just came through, and I think, Biz, you're probably best positioned to answer it. There was a really great tweet following the US elections by the anthropologist Jason Hickel, who is also a contributor and supporter of New Internationalist, in which he says, because liberalism cannot address our crises and because it crushes socialist alternatives, it inevitably paves the way for right-wing populism. Can you sort of talk a bit about that, Biz, and your reflections on that? We'll share the tweet in the chat as well.
It is interesting. So there was a high point for what could be considered that form of liberalism, and it was 1999. You had the Democrats in the White House, and you had 23 out of 25 European EU countries that were governed by the centre-left. So this is the late 90s. The centre-left in power says that we live in a post-racial world, in many cases, a sort of classless world. Now, the Soviet Union had fallen. So the centre-left saw itself as the vehicle to sort of bring humanity forward. But all you have to do is fast forward a bit more than a decade. By 2010, most of Europe's run by the conservative right. And in that period from 2010 to 2020, the cordon sanitaire between the right and the far right disappeared. And these parties entered governing coalitions and the mainstream adopted their narrative. Now, the centre left, having been dethroned, instead of going back to first principles around universalism, one nationism, actually sort of legitimized it in most Western democratic countries. They said that actually immigration is a problem, multiculturalism is a problem. And those votes that came not only from Europe's minoritized communities that came over in the era past decolonization, they lost votes from them, and they also lost votes from what I would consider well-meaning members of the native populace, white populace of Europe, who saw these policies as cruel. So you've seen the once great French Socialist Party go from being in power in 2012 to having 1.2% in the polls last election, and you've seen a similar thing in a number of countries. So a sort of muscular liberalism is not popular enough to take on the far right because, frankly, electorates go, well, why would I vote for a version of anti-immigrant politics where I can go straight to the source with my viable far right party? So Jason definitely has a strong point in that, and the answer probably should be a broad coalition of forces that oppose the far right. I would say in 2025, the dividing line is very clear. You're either with Trumpism or against it. And which side of the line you're on, you should spend your time building coalitions with other voices wanting to oppose Trumpist forms of nativist politics.
Thanks so much, Biz. Yeah, that's a really helpful answer. Everyone can please use the thread to post your questions, including if there's someone specific you'd like to answer it, or if it's for all of the panelists. That's the best way to have your question seen. Just another one that's come through. Oh, actually, before we move into that, I've just seen we've had another £40 come in from Bill, who says it is our responsibility to oppose the move to the extreme right. So that also inches us a little bit further, which is so cool and amazing. So thank you so much, everyone. Even those of you that have just been tuning in to listen, this is all where it starts, movement building and connecting with one another and being able to really work together. So yeah, just thanks again, everyone, for joining. Just another question that has come through. How can we balance standing strongly against hate and take that radical political position we need without switching people off who feel that discussions are too polarized? Yeah, Taiwo, you've got your hands up. Are you able to unmute yourself and perhaps we can hear you now?
Oh, yes, I didn't know what happened, but apparently we have had the challenges with data in Nigeria. So
no problem. We can hear you well now. So great to have you back with us.
Okay, thank you. So if I could just say a few things regarding why we're here, I would really like to.
Yes, yeah, please do.
Okay, yes. So I'd just like to say.
Oh dear, I think we've lost him again.
You hear me?
Yeah, you cut out.
Can you hear me?
Cut out a little bit, but try again.
So I said that why I think that the kind of journalism we do at New Internationalist is very important and needs to be supported at this period is that with New Internationalist, we are talking about journalism that is aimed at uncovering issues of injustice, authoritarianism, a toolkit, for people, for youth, for the working class, to be able to fight, against a system of oppression and exploitation. So in that sense, this is not just journalism for the purpose of breaking the news. It's journalism aimed at also providing people across the world with the appropriate ideas about the root of the suffering and what can be done about it. And that is very important.
I think we've lost you again, Taiwo. But if you come back in, oh, can you hear us? Yeah, sorry, you cut out just as you're saying really great things, but we got about 70% of that. So yeah, did you want to just finish that
Okay, it's all right. Well, I just like to end by saying that we should all support the kind of journalism promoted by an internationalist. Every dollar, every pound would be very important in helping to keep this important platform running, ensuring that the struggles and the voices of people across the world who are suffering from capitalism and authoritarianism are being heard. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think that is really great to hear from our contributors. And it reminds me of a comment that we received from a longtime reader via the crowdfunder and some of our comms around that over the last month, is that we aren't doing journalism to tell you what to think, but we are giving you the information and the tools to make up your own mind and to take action on your own terms and to support the movements and the causes that matter to you. So we're not here to tell you what to think and to, tell you what to do. It's about giving you the tools, giving you the resources, and giving you the information to really make up your own mind. So with that, we're just going to move in now. Like, as we said, we are going to be doing a giveaway of 5 free digital subscriptions to those of you that have attended the call. So I'm just going to, we've done a random name selector from all of you that have joined in. And I'm just going to read out the names of those that have won, and then you can DM us with your email address just via the New Internationalist DM, and we will make sure that you're set up with that free digital subscription. And thanks for joining us today. So those are going to at Cheyenne_Brian, at Cheese_Buddy, at Twiga 2012, and at Obed Hailsham. So if the 5 of you can please DM us, we will make sure that you're set up with that digital subscription. Our current issue is on Indigenous sovereignty in Australia, and our upcoming issue for May, June is all about mining and can we mine our way out of the climate crisis. I just wanted to give the last few minutes for anyone that has any further questions. Unfortunately, we did lose Nick Dearden from Global Justice Now. I think he was having some tech issues. But any further questions that any listeners have for Nick or for any of the other panelists, feel free to send them through, and we can definitely try to get back to you whether it is off this channel as well. Like I said, we will also be sharing this recording on YouTube and on our podcast as we approach our deadline for the fundraiser on the 21st. So just checking the chat here for any further questions. My colleague Amy has also just dropped a link for our free newsletter. This is the best way to kind of keep on top of our journalism and be the first to know when our Far Right magazine is out, which is the magazine that we are funding through this campaign, and the best way to stay on top of all of our journalism. So thank you so much again, everyone. I don't think I've seen any questions in the chat, so we might just leave it there. Thank you so much to Tarushi, Biz, and Taiwo, as well as to Nick for joining us. Thank you so much to all of the attendees. This is a new format for us. As we said before, we are not planning on staying on X long term. This is simply an event to really mobilize our existing audiences on this platform. And I think we have definitely made a good start with that today. So keep in touch and we will update everyone soon. And those of you that I mentioned, please DM and we will get you your subscriptions. Thanks so much, everyone, and we will speak to you soon.